This is a talk on the three, sometimes called the three marks or the three seals of Buddhism, very fundamental. It was inspired from reading a book called Why Buddhism is True. Fantastic book. But the talk actually is based on Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings. He wrote a book called The Heart of the Buddha Sutra. What is the name of the book? The Heart of the Buddha's Teachings. So that's what the talk is mainly about. And I'm going to have little activities in between that you're just going to write something out. And then at the end of my talk, I'm going to ask people to get into groups of 3 and to share what you've written with the people in your group. And ask questions if there's still time. But yeah, after the groups, I want to hear what people discovered in the group. So as some of you may know, and I'm reading from the text that I wrote, mostly from Thich Nhat Hanh. But as some of you know, for 400 years, during and after Buddha's lifetime, his teachings were transmitted only orally. It wasn't like a text, there wasn't any text. And there were different schools that sprang up. So the reason I'm telling you this, there were different interpretations. And some people, or a lot of the teachings, see the 3 seals as not just impermanence, non-self, and nirvana. They see them as impermanence, non-self, and suffering. Suffering is a key concept. I'm not going to go into it in detail of Buddhism, that all life is suffering and there's ways out of suffering. But Thich Nhat Hanh decided that suffering didn't fall into the same category as impermanence and non-self. I'm going to go into those in detail. For example, a table could be impermanent, and it doesn't really have a self. And by that, what Thich Nhat Hanh means, it's made up of a lot of things. So it's not like one self, just like we're made up of a lot of things. So it's universal, whereas suffering, he said, is not. Hanh says it's an error to put suffering on the same level as impermanence and non-self. Impermanence and non-self are universal. They are the mark of all things. Suffering is not. So the 3 Dharma seals, also known as the 3 marks of existence, are central concepts in Buddhist philosophy and are rooted in the teaching of the Buddha. They articulate the fundamental aspects of existence according to Buddhist thought. But the thing that you'll keep hearing in the heart of the Buddhist teaching is that this is not about philosophy, it's about practice. And that's why we spend at least doing the walking meditation for about 20 minutes and then the sitting meditation. So impermanence, we all know what that means. Things are changing all the time. 3 hours ago, I had a fine ankle. I stepped up on one of, what do you call those curves or cars, you know, those little cement things. And I guess I wasn't paying attention, and I'm too darn old. And I just, you know, the rounded, and I just tilted a little bit, and all of a sudden I felt that I was able to correct myself. I didn't fall, but wow, it just pulled a muscle in my ankle or tendon, and I'm in a little pain. Fortunately, I corrected it in time. But all of a sudden that changed. I was fine 3 hours ago. And we all know things are changing all the time. So that goes into both concepts, that there's nothing permanent, that things are changing. And it also goes into the self is changing, that there is no real self. Let me tell you what Thich Nhat Hanh says. For many of us, impermanence, non-self, and nirvana are just concepts. But for the Buddha, they were practices. High writes, if we see impermanence as a philosophy, it is not the Buddha's teaching. He also writes that the only way to access these three seals is by practicing them, by looking deeply into each one. When we look deeply into impermanence, we see that things change because causes and conditions change. When we look deeply into non-self, we see that existence of every single thing is possible only because the existence of everything else. We see that everything else is the cause and condition for its existence. We see that everything else is in it. This is so hard for a lot of us to get, I think, Western, because I really think that I think I'm a self. I think I know who this person is. I mean, I've been on this planet 72 years. Like, I think I know, but I don't know the water inside me. I don't really know that. I certainly don't know the atoms. I don't know the bacteria. I mean, this brain that's connected, but it's still another organ. Kai says, and that's a nickname for Thich Nhat Hanh, things cannot remain themselves for 2 consecutive moments. Therefore, there is nothing that can be called a permanent self. Before you entered this room, you were different physically and mentally. Looking deeply at impermanence, you see non-self. Looking deeply at non-self, you see impermanence. We cannot say, I can't accept impermanence, but non-self is too difficult, because they're the same. Without impermanence, the child you once were could not have become the person you are now. Could you just imagine that you were all this fellow's age right here? Every one of you were his age. Not that long ago, really, relatively. Ty believes that when we know that the person we love is impermanent, we will cherish our beloved all the more. Impermanence teaches us to respect and value every moment and all the precious things around us and inside us. He's an optimist. I didn't realize he's a real optimist. Because somebody could say, well, impermanence, I could be sad over it. But he's saying it's an opportunity to cherish what there is. So here's the first activity that you have, these wonderful pads and paper. So I'm going to ask you to please take a minute and jot down on a piece of paper in front of you 3 things that you believe have altered since you walked into the meditation center tonight. You can include anything. I'm giving you a big canvas. 3 things. It could be biology. It could be things about yourself. It could be things about the physical environment outside. It could be your thoughts. Anything. It could be the sky, the building. So you only have a minute. I'm going fast on this.
Could you repeat the prompt?
The prompt is to jot down, and yes, please do it online, 3 things that you believe have altered since you came to the Dallas Meditation Center tonight. All right, so I'm going to move on. And it's okay if you didn't get, all three or any even. But Ty writes, when we know that the person we love is impermanent, we will cherish our beloved all the more. So that's the optimist in him. Impermanence teaches us to respect and value every moment as precious around us and inside us. When we practice mindfulness of impermanence, we become fresher and more loving. Okay, second activity. Think of a person or place you appreciate. I think I prefer a person, but that you appreciate or love that you haven't seen for at least an hour. And write down, and it could be that you've just seen them, that's fine. You could forget about that hour. Write down three ways you think that person has changed since you last saw them. Well, that's why it should be a period of time. Did everybody get that? You want me to repeat it?
Repeat it.
Sure. Think of a person or place, preferably a person, that you appreciate, that you haven't seen for at least an hour. And write down 3 ways you think that person has changed since you last saw them. Maybe they grew more hair. Certainly grew older. Okay, I'm going to move on. Looking deeply can become a way of life. We can practice conscious breathing to help us be in touch with things and to look deeply at their impermanent nature. Impermanence is what makes transformation possible. And it's so hard for me to get that, because we get attached. And that's another great thing about Buddhism, because they talk about not being attached. We should learn to say, long live impermanence. Thanks to impermanence, we can change suffering into joy. But it's hard when you're in the middle of suffering. But still, if we know that it's going to pass. If we practice the art of mindful living, when things change, we won't have any regrets. We can smile because we have done our best to enjoy every moment of our life and to make others happy. We have to nourish our insight into impermanence every day. If we do, we will live more deeply, suffer less, and enjoy life more. So here's activity 3. When was the last time before this talk that you were very conscious of impermanence? And what had you be conscious of it? Well, when was the last time before this talk that you were conscious of impermanence? And what had you become conscious of it? So, impermanence, you were conscious of something not being around or someone or yourself. Now I'm going on to the second Dharma seal, non-self. Again, Ty writes, non-self is not a doctrine or a philosophy. It is an insight that can help us live more deeply, suffer less, and enjoy life more. Ty shares the story of 2 monks. I don't have the book in front of me, but basically this one monk really hated this other monk. And he calls them monk A and monk B. And A just couldn't stand B. But he goes to this wise monk. I may be mixing the edges of the story up a little bit, but this is the basic story. And he's sharing how he hates this other monk. And the wise monk washes his head, and it's kind of mystical and magic. And And he says, you are now monk B. So monk A hates monk B. He said, you are now monk B. And monk A, who used to be monk A, looks in the mirror and he's monk B. And he can't believe it. He's the person he hated. And he has to deal with that. So what Ty is saying, oops, excuse me, that he's saying we should practice so that we can see Muslims and as Hindus and Hindus as Muslims. We should practice so we can see Israelis as Palestinians and Palestinians as Israelis. Seems hard to believe right now, but we should practice until we can see that each person is us, that we are not separate from others, and that this will greatly reduce our suffering. We are what we perceive. This is a teaching of non-self, of interbeing. And I have a hard time pronouncing some of these names, but when Avalokiteshvara declared that eyes, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind are empty, he meant that they cannot be by themselves alone. They have to interbe with everything else. Our eyes would not be possible without non-I elements. That is why he can say that our eyes have no separate existence. We have to see the nature of interbeing to really understand it. Non-self means that you are made of elements which are not you. During the past hour, different elements have entered you and other elements have flown out of you. Well, if you've gone to the bathroom, that's certainly the case, but I think even through our skin, your happiness, in fact, your existence comes from things that are not you. Don't sometimes your partner makes you happy, or a friend, or a dog? Happiness is not an individual matter. Okay, here's activity 4. Write down one thing that you know is composed of many other things and cannot stand alone. So again, it's the write down one thing that you know is composed of many other things and cannot stand alone. Okay, I'm going on. The teachings of impermanence and non-self were offered by the Buddha as keys to unlock the door of reality. We have to train ourselves to look in a way that we know that when we touch one thing, we touch everything. We have to see that one is in the all and the all is in the one. We touch not only the phenomenal aspects of reality, but the ground of being. Things are impermanent and without self. They have to undergo birth and death. But if we touch them very deeply, we touch the ground of being that is free from birth and death, free from permanence and impermanence, self and non-self. And that again is the power of meditation. So this leads us to the third Dharma seal, Nirvana. Nirvana, the third Dharma seal, is the ground of being, the substance of all that is. A wave does not have to die in order to become water. Water is wave. The wave is already water. We are also like that. We carry in us the ground of interbeing, Nirvana, the world of no birth and no death, no permanence and no impermanence, no self and no non-self. Nirvana is the complete silencing of concepts. The notion of impermanence and non-self were offered by the Buddha as instruments of practice, not as doctrines to worship, fight, or die for. My dear friends, the Buddha said, the Dharma I offer you is only a raft to help you across over to the other shore. The raft is not to be held onto as an object of worship. It is an instrument for crossing over to the shore of well-being. If you are caught in the Dharma, it is no longer the Dharma. Impermanence and non-self belong to the world of phenomena, like the waves. Nirvana is the ground of all that is. The waves do not exist outside the water. If you know how to touch the waves, you touch the water at the same time. Nirvana does not exist separate from impermanence and non-self. If you know how to use the tools of impermanence and non-self to touch reality, you touch nirvana in the here and now. Nirvana is the extinction of all notions. Birth is a notion. Death is a notion. Being is a notion. Non-being is a notion. In our lives, we have to deal with these relative realities. But if we touch life more deeply, reality will reveal itself in a different way. We think that being born means from nothing we become something. From no one we become someone. From non-being we become being. We think that to die means we suddenly go from something to nothing. From someone to no one. From being to non-being. But the Buddha said there is no birth and no death. No being and no non-being. And he offered us impermanence, non-self, interbeing, and emptiness to discover the true nature of reality. In the Heart Sutra, we repeat over and over that there is no birth and no death. But reciting is not enough. The Heart Sutra is an instrument to investigate the true nature of ourselves and the world. When you look at this sheet of paper, the sheet of paper you have in front of you, you think it belongs to the realm of being. There was a time that it came into existence. A moment in the factory, it became a sheet of paper. But before the sheet of paper was born, was it nothing? Can nothing become something? But before it was recognizable as a sheet of paper, it must have been something else. Maybe it was a tree, a branch, sunshine, clouds, the earth. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, no, there's no maybe about it. That's what it was. You are holding a tree. You are holding clouds. You are holding sunshine. In its former lives, the sheet of paper was all these things. If you ask the sheet of paper, tell me about all your adventures, she will tell you, talk to a flower, a tree, or a cloud, and listen to their stories. The paper story is much like our own. We too have many wonderful things to tell. Before we were born, we were also already in our mother, our father, and our ancestors. The koan, what was your face before your parents were born, is an invitation to look deeply to identify ourselves in time and space. We usually think we did not exist before the time of our parents, that we only began to exist at the moment of birth. But we were already here in many forms. The day of our birth was only a day of continuation. I've heard Bobby say this a few times, that Ty wanted us not to ever say happy birthday, and even in his death, it's happy continuation day. Because we're on a long journey. Oh, that almost makes you want to cry. It does. If I burn, or if you burn the paper in front of you, will it turn into non-being? No, Thich Nhat Hanh says. It will just be transformed into smoke, heat, and ash. If we put the continuation of this sheet of paper into the garden later, while practicing walking meditation, we may see a little flower and recognize it as the rebirth of the sheet of paper. The smoke will become part of a cloud in the sky, also to continue the adventure. After tomorrow, a little rain may fall on your head, and you will recognize the sheet of paper as saying hello. The heat produced by the burning will penetrate into your body in the cosmos. Okay, the last activity I have now. Write down either some of the ways you existed before you were born, or some of the ways you'll exist after you leave this human body. I'll repeat that. Write down either some of the ways you existed before you were born, or some of the ways you'll exist after you leave this human body. Really, it's a powerful teaching. Very, very powerful. All right, I'm going to keep going. Just a little more, and then I'm going to have you break into groups. So looking deeply, we see that birth is just a notion and death is just a notion. Nothing can be born from nothing. When we touch the sheet of paper deeply, when we touch the cloud deeply, when we touch our grandmother deeply, we touch the nature of no birth and no death. And we are free from sorrow. We already recognize them in many forms. This is the insight that helped the Buddha become serene, peaceful, and fearless. This teaching of the Buddha can help us touch deeply the nature of our being and the ground of our being so that we can touch the world of no birth and no death. This is the insight that liberates us from fear and sorrow. Nirvana means extinction above all the extinction of ideas, the ideas of birth and death, existence and non-existence, coming and going, self and others, one and many. All these ideas cause us to suffer. We are afraid of death because ignorance gives us an illusory idea about what death is. We are disturbed by ideas of existence and non-existence because we have not understood the true nature of impermanence and non-self. We worry about our own future, but we fail to worry about the future of others because we think that our happiness has nothing to do with the happiness of others. This idea of self and others give rise to measurable suffering. In order to extinguish these ideas, we have to practice. Nirvana is a fan that helps us extinguish the fire of all our ideas, including ideas of permanence and self. That fan is our practice of looking deeply every day. Thank you. That's the end of the talk. Now, what I'd like you to do is go into groups of 3, and maybe, what do we have, about 10 minutes. Share what you've written, maybe one at a time, because there were 6 different activities. So just, you have to be kind of quick, because then I'm going to leave some room for people to share what you discovered. Why don't you just pick 3 people next to you and just get together, if you don't mind. And if you don't want to share, just listen. Just tell them you know it's private. You don't want to share. And people on camera, you can you could do this too, but I don't know. So did you stop recording already? Or?